What people don't realize is the thing that actually makes the biggest difference day to day, yours and mine, when it comes to saving the planet, is the choice we make about what we put on our plate. How much animal products we choose to consume is the number one way that we contribute or help the planetary health or cause its devastation. And so that's the biggest hurdle that I get into, is that I think most reasonable minds agree that climate change is happening and we need to do something. But when we talk about what people need to do, that's the area that it gets the hardest to discuss. And people have a hard time understanding that what they're consuming and what they're eating is the number one way that they can help make a better future.
Welcome to the Better Life for Animals podcast, where we amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we shine a light on the efforts to rescue, protect, and advocate for animals. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Every follower helps us reach more people. And support animal sanctuaries. Enjoy the conversation.
My guest today is Matthew Dominguez, U.S. Executive Director of Compassion in World Farming, the largest and oldest farm animal organization on the planet. With more than 15 years of experience in animal welfare and food policy, Matthew has driven major corporate commitments, shaped landmark legislation, and is now leading CIWF's mission to end factory farming by 2040. He believes that change happens not by one sweeping revolution, but, as he puts it, by death by 1,000 cuts. Today we talk strategy, coalition building, and what it really takes to move the needle for billions of animals. Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honor.
Oh, same here. What was that moment that made you choose animal advocacy as your life's work?
I think for many of us that do this work day in and day out, there's probably a lot. If you look back over my life, I'm sure that there's over 1,000 individual interactions, either with animals or people, that I think shaped me to get to where I'm at now. I was raised on a cattle ranch, and so I had the both benefits and other things to be around farm animals, cows and pigs and chickens from a very young age. And I know that being around those animals and knowing them as individuals and seeing the different characteristics and their different behaviors and just the way they interacted with each other, I knew from a very young age that they were no different than our dogs and cats. And, I think about my animals that I had when I was a child, and, when they passed away, we would have funerals for them and we would grieve. And then there were these other animals that we would then raise and we would name, but then they went off to become an animal product. And it always felt very odd to me. But it wasn't until I actually went to law school at Lewis and Clark, where I went for environmental law. I had no idea what animal law was. I had no idea that animal law and doing this work was even a career that you could go into. But when I went to that law school, I was destined, I guess, or lucky enough that there was a great animal law program, and it was being around some really amazing people and professors that opened my eyes to this issue and the need to speak up for the billions and billions of animals that are raised in factory farms across the planet.
Wonderful. So CWIF is the largest and the oldest farm animal organization on the planet, but a lot of people haven't heard of it. Why is that, and what does CIWF actually do?
So Compassion World Farming was founded actually by a farmer in the 1960s. And he and his wife were on this path of where the factory farming industry was trying to take hold in the UK. And they were proposed with either, if you want to continue farming, you need to go down the path of taking your animals off the fields and put them in steel barns and raise them as things instead of living creatures, or get out of farming. And to their credit, the founder and his wife decided that this is wrong. This is not what farming should be. And that's when Compassion World Farming was born like I said, in the early 1960s. It's a UK-based organization. And I will say over in the UK and certain countries over in the EU, we're very well known. But in the United States, our office has been open for about 10 years. It was founded just a little over a decade ago. And one of the things that we do that is different, and it's also important because I don't think that there should be multiple organizations that do the same thing. When you look at the breadth of organizations that are out there, unfortunately, there's not enough of them, and there's far too little people fighting for farm animals. But we play a very distinct role where we are an organization that works in a pragmatic way. In addition to, we assume positive intent and work positively with companies, with lawmakers, and others to try to encourage them to make better decisions, higher welfare products, working with them to make commitments and transition to a better food system through positive engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't agree that there's a place for pressure campaigns in those organizations that are more of the hammer in the movement. Many of my friends work at those organizations, and I believe strongly that they have an important role. But the role we play is one that's typically behind the scenes, but also, as I mentioned, I think it's a critically important one.
Absolutely. I love your mission to end factory farming by 2040. So what does that success look, and how close are you? How are we doing?
Not aggressive at all. I mean, ending arguably one of the largest causes of suffering on the planet, which is factory farming, and to do that in really what we have a little over 2 decades left. I think it's important to put timelines on things. I think having an open-ended goal where you seek to do something big and historic, like ending the largest cause of suffering on the planet and one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases and global warming, one that is causing health crises and water crises and just overall destruction of this planet, couldn't be a more important thing to work on. But when we're looking at the time that we need to get this done, the 2040 actually doesn't come from a place of where we just decided randomly that we want it done by 2040. The global CEO of this organization, Philip Limbry, wrote a really wonderful book. And what he talked about in it is that we have 60 harvests left. Period. End of sentence. And this comes from the data from the UN and the World Health Organization and others that say that we essentially have 60 harvests left before our soil and our water are completely unusable. Before we get to a place where we have a planetary crisis where we have gone beyond the pale when it comes to supporting life on this planet and being able to grow our own food and continue having a food system. And so this isn't a matter of having a goal of 2040 because we want it to end. If it were up to me, factory farming would have ended 10 years ago. It would end tomorrow. It would end at 2030. But 2040 is really that deadline of where when we pass 2040, there is no going back. It's now then a matter of mitigation rather than actually solving the problem. And so for us, that 2040 is an important target. Now, whether or not we will reach it, I think that is a question for brilliant minds far smarter than I am, but I think it's an important goal to reach for. It's something that we're rushing to as fast as we can. And while we're working on a lot of welfare issues right now, I think over the course of the 2030s, when we get a little bit closer to that deadline, we're actually going to have probably more in-depth conversations about real food system transformations. I think it's going to be a steady climb. So if we were looking at like a pie chart, or I'm sorry, a graph, and you look at the end of factory farming, I think it kind of is at a steep, not a steep, but like kind of a medium gradient upwards trend, and then it's going to spike. And I think it's going to be because we have to. It's a matter of human population extinction or not. And so for us, that 2040 deadline is so critically important that we keep our eye on it at all times.
Do you get the sense that anyone is noticing the weather change around us? I notice our current political environment, at least in the United States, is not all that supportive. But surely, I know when I see things like there's no snow, it's going to be the hottest summer in the West, I'm not surprised. I wonder if you run into that in your work. Do people go, oh, I'm starting to wake up, starting to see what's happening here?
We, CIWF, Compassion, we just recently, the global organization, released this really important report that talked about the climate impacts of factory farming and just the disasters that we're seeing. I was born on the West Coast. I now live on the East Coast. And it seems like every year it's either the worst winter of all time or there's no snow and there's no rain. It's either a drought or flooding. It's either massive hurricanes or nothing at all. It's heat waves or it is freezing temperatures across the country. It's the extremes that we've been warned about. I mean, scientists, it's not a question. I mean, no reasonable person debates whether or not climate change is real. I mean, it is, period, full sentence, stop. And for those who want to debate that, I have no time or no desire to debate that with them. But one of the things that we face is an issue of people not understanding the drivers of climate change. Now, I know fossil fuels is typically the thing that people like to attack, and rightfully so. I mean, fossil fuels is a huge contributor, if not one of the largest contributors to global warming and the disaster that we're facing with the health of our planet. But that is a very indirect way, or it's a really difficult way for people to make change. I mean, whether or not you drive your car or drive an SUV or a small car, while that makes a difference, what people don't realize is the thing that actually makes the biggest difference day to day, yours and mine, when it comes to saving the planet, is the choice we make about what we put on our plate. Mm-hmm. How much animal products we choose to consume is the number one way that we contribute or help the planetary health or cause its devastation. And so that's the biggest hurdle that I get into, is that I think most reasonable minds agree that climate change is happening and we need to do something. But when we talk about what people need to do, that's the area that it gets the hardest to discuss. And people have a hard time understanding that what they're consuming and what they're eating is the number one way that they can help make a better future. And so those conversations are always something I'm happy to have a conversation on, but it's also something that sometimes it can be frustrating at times.
And you're right, it's the key. And we all are working feverishly trying to figure out what is going to unlock it for that individual. And then I keep thinking, okay, keep working it. And then one day it's going to become like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, or, tobacco. One day we're just going, what? We did what? But we're not there yet. I also, sometimes advocates feel that pushing for better welfare conditions makes people more comfortable. They're making their lives a little bit easier, and then they can look away. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation to have, and I've had it with quite a few people, and there's a lot of us that struggle with this. I mean, it is not something that the leaders of the farm animal movement here in the U.S. don't discuss when we have opportunities to talk with each other. Is what are the impacts of what we do? And I understand for folks that fall more kind of on the side of the camp of promoting veganism or plant-based diets, and that's the work that they do, or if they're abolitionists and simply want animal exploitation to end right now, and that's the only thing they fight for. I applaud them. I cheer them on. I love the work that they're doing, and I think it's incredibly and vitally important. And I think that there's a subsect of the population that are receptive to that messaging and willing to do it. But I think that the argument doesn't hold water when you actually look at human psychology. I mean, when you talk to most people that are now animal advocates and vegans and animal rights activists, most of us actually got pulled into this through welfare campaigns. It was battery cages for chickens. It was gestation crates for pigs. It was the better chicken commitment and talking about the horrible lives that broiler hens have. Those are the things that are something that we can talk about to the general public, and at least they're willing to listen. And what's really interesting for me is that once you start believing that a chicken deserves a better life, you've now assigned value to that animal. You believe that animal has value. You believe that that animal has an inherent right to not suffer. And I don't think it ends with just saying, oh, well, they shouldn't be in a cage, end of sentence, and then I'm fine with anything that comes after that. This is a conversation. It's about progress, and progress begets progress. And so for me, it's about creating momentum. And I also think that there are going to be people on this planet for a considerable amount of time that aren't willing to move fully to a plant-based diet. And for those animals, you talk about the 240 million egg-laying hens that used to be trapped in battery cages, and now nearly 50% of those are out of those cages. They have a life that is better. Now, is it a perfect life? Absolutely not. But it's a reduction of suffering. And I think if I was one of those hens and I was sitting in a cage, or I was a mother pig in a gestation crate, yes, I would like to not be in that situation. But if someone was fighting for me to get out of those cages or those crates, I would probably be happy with that because my life would be better.
Well put.
You're listening to Better Life for Animals podcast. Our mission is to amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. First of all, go ahead and subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching or listening. And then get involved by visiting betterlifeforanimals.com. That's betterlifeforanimals.com. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about incredible sanctuaries, and explore our book section, where 100% of net proceeds from book sales are donated to sanctuaries. Every action you take helps to make a difference. And remember, subscribe to this channel. And now, back to the show.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Matthew Dominguez of Compassion in World Farming. Matthew, you've gotten major corporations to make animal welfare commitments. What does it take, and what happens when they don't follow through?
Yeah, that's something we're struggling with right now. I mean, we've certainly, as a movement in Compassion World Farming, has done a phenomenal job getting some of the largest, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of companies to make commitments to do better on behalf of animals. And there's a lot of other organizations that we work with that are doing some phenomenal work in that space as well. So we certainly can't take all the credit. There's some really great groups out there like Mercy for Animals and the Humane League and Humane World for Animals, formerly known as HSUS. And so it's a really collective effort. But one of the things that we're seeing, I don't know if it's so much the political climate or just the cards that have been stacked against us, is that a lot of companies have followed through on their commitments. And again, the numbers that I just talked about, it used to be 240 million egg-laying hens in battery cages. We're now at about 50%. And that's not something that we should just forget. It's something we should celebrate. Granted, we want 100%, and we're working towards that. And I think many of us 10 years ago would have thought that 100% would be in this particular year. But these companies are struggling. They're having a hard time meeting their commitments, and that's where organizations that put pressure on them, I think, are important. And that's where, I think the other roles that the other groups play are vitally important, is holding them accountable to the public. We also do that at CIWF. And while we do positively work with companies, as they fail to meet their commitments, we have hard conversations with them. In fact, earlier today, I was on a call with a major corporation where we had a heart-to-heart to say, listen, your deadline to be 100% cage-free was last year. You've missed that commitment. What do we do to get you to 100%? How do we put a roadmap together to get you there as quickly as possible? Because it's one, it's what you've committed to, and two, it's because it's what's important to do for animals. And so right now we are having some difficult conversations, but ultimately I think it's about conversations with the companies, being very direct with them with what we want, offering them a solution, offering them support when it comes to how to get to the goal that they're trying to reach. And other organizations put pressure on them and show that the consumers and their customers want higher welfare, or they want them to move to include more plant-based options. Tell
us about Food Not Feed. What is that campaign about, and why does it matter?
The Food Not Feed campaign was it's a campaign that's been launched by CIWF globally. So the U.S. office is working on this particular campaign as well. But it really was a report that came out that talked about the inefficiency when it comes to the animal agricultural sector. So when you break it down to the most basic form, what we do in the United States, and this is really insane to think about, is that we raise crops and use all of the land and all of the water and all of the inputs that go into growing food to then feed to an animal, to then slaughter the animal, and then to feed to humans. That is an inefficient system. And what this report highlights is that if we were to stop taking edible food, so corn, soy, other cereals, and other grains that we turn into livestock feed for farm animals, and we were to grow that directly, that food for humans, we would be able to feed another 2 to 3 billion people on this planet. When you take the caloric and the protein intake of growing food and feeding it to an animal, the output is somewhere between 2 to 3% to about 20% of the same output. So for every 100 calories you grow through food and grains and soil, and then feed that to an animal, we get anywhere between 2 to 3% up to about 20% of that back out to human food. And at a time where over 40 million children go to sleep hungry in the United States, and globally we have millions and millions of people that are starving, it is unbelievably immoral that we have an industry that eats up so much soil, so much clean air, so much energy, and so much food that otherwise could go to feeding humans. It really is to highlight the inefficiency. And what we need to do in our country, in the United States and other countries, is we need a food first policy. We need policies that take subsidies from taxpayers and put that money into food for humans. We need to incentivize farmers to grow food that goes directly to humans and not billions and billions of dollars of subsidies. Again, taxpayer dollars that you and I are giving to the federal government that are going to seed companies and grain companies that are then inefficiently feeding these to animals, and then those animals are ending up on other people's plates.
You gave a keynote at Climate Week in New York. It was very good. How are factory farming and climate change connected?
I mean, it's more than connected. I mean, it's intertwined in a way where you can't talk about one without the other. And that's one of the things that's troubling is you can't talk about moving to whether it's regenerative farming or having a food system that is going to be able to feed people and also not destroy our planet. You can't talk about climate change without talking about the food that is going on people's plates. It is one of the largest drivers of climate change. What we choose to eat, the animals that are raised in these systems, when it comes to the fertilizers that's used, the energy that's used, the transportation, all of the manure that's the runoff that's destroying our rivers, they are one of the largest polluters of our waterways, of the air, of the soil. The monocropping for the seed that we just talked about, for the food that's then fed to these farm animals, it is literally destroying our planet. And so one of the focuses at Climate Weeks here in New York is really talking about regenerative farming and moving to a better system that one is more nature friendly. And so one of the things that I talked about in the keynote speech is really that this is intertwined. You can't talk about regenerative farming and you can't talk about food systems without talking about animal welfare because they're interchangeably linked. Higher welfare systems, animals that are raised in a regenerative system, are going to also help make sure that we are having a food system that isn't destroying this planet. Now, granted, the 1,000-pound elephant in the room, and this is something we're very clear about, is that if we want to move to a regenerative farming system, we're going to have to consume less meat. And I don't think that that should necessarily be something that is considered a crazy thought. In the United States, it's somewhere between, depending on male and female, and it's a little bit different by about 10%. But the average American in the United States eats about 20 to 40% more protein than they actually need to survive. If we were to just reduce, so I'm saying if we were to just stop over-consuming food that we actually don't need, that is then leading to obesity and health issues, and you were still eating as much animal product as you need to get the caloric intake and the protein that you're supposed to get, we would save another 2 to 4 billion farm animals. I mean, think about that. 2 to 4 billion farm animals would be saved and not put through a hellish system, all for you to overeat. So that's some of the conversations we need to have is how do we stop consuming so many animal products? The animal products that we do consume, how do we make sure that they're coming from a higher welfare system and more nature friendly? It's the only way that we can really start having meaningful conversations and moving this in a better direction.
Well, that sounds like the reducitarian model, which while I would love everyone to care about it because of the animals, I'm going to be fine with whatever it takes to reduce, your consumption, because if a lot of people do that, we will see what you just mentioned there.
Sometimes we have to separate, and I mean this with all the kindness in the world, because people that are fighting for farm animals and people that are fighting for animals are some of the kindest, most thoughtful, they're some of the most wonderful people that I've ever met in my entire life. And I will admit that my ego gets involved with my work as well. And for all of us that do this, there's a part of us that wants it to be done for the right reasons. I would love for everyone to stop harming animals because animals are deserving to not be harmed. I would love for that to be the reason. But again, if we go back to that chicken in a cage or that mother pig in a gestation crate, she doesn't care why she's out of a cage. She doesn't care why her life is spared. What she cares about is that her life is better and that she's not abused. And if that's because someone wants to eat a healthier diet, or they care about the environment, or they care about the workers, or they care about making sure that local communities aren't destroyed by these factory farms, I don't care what the reason is. I just want people to do something different than they're currently doing, which is paying at the supermarkets and every restaurant. They're essentially voting with their dollars to destroy our planets, to abuse animals, to hurt their own health, to destroy local communities, to harm workers on factory farms. It is almost an endless list of reasons why someone should be opposed to factory farming. Oftentimes I'm asked, why are you opposed to factory farming? Why are you a plant-based person? And I kind of, now I've gotten to the point where I respond of like, I list those reasons and I ask them, well, why are you not? Because it's not a matter of why am I, it's why are you not? Do you not care about these 10, 15 reasons? And most people do. But we also have to realize that the system is inherently meant to keep people in the dark. When you look at, I talk about this quite a bit because I think it's important to realize just the Herculean effort that we have. People talk about David and Goliath, and man, we're not even David. We're not even the slingshot. We're just the rock in the slingshot in comparison in size. If you were to take all of the money that farm animal organizations get in the United States, well, actually, forget that. If you were to take all of the money that animal protection organizations get in the United States, which only about 1 or 2% go to farm animals, despite the fact that they're 1 or 2% of all the animals that are harmed. If you were to take all of that money that we have, all of these groups, and put it into a bucket, and you were to compare that to just the advertising budget of Tyson or the advertising budget of Smithfield, we are outnumbered. This industry is massive. The fact that we have won any victories is almost insane to think about. We should be very proud of how far we've come and how many animals we've helped. There's a long way to go, but it really is about this disproportionate. So for me, I just want people to care and I just want people to take action. And for whatever reasons they do, great. Because we should be on the same team.
I'm learning to do what you mentioned, which is to not do all the heavy lifting, as Claire Mann calls it, and trying to ask the question back. It's like, instead of my having to defend myself, it's like, well, why aren't you? Or am I the only one who sees how horrible this is? Or, just put it back to the individual that's asking the question, instead of feeling like I have to have all the facts and figures, which you have, Matthew, but for most of us, we don't, right? So we just get a little bit like, I don't know. So it's nice to be able to say, well, let's have a conversation about this, and, tell me why you don't see the cruelty that is in this system. So I love that part of it.
I think two things that's important to do also when you're talking to folks, if they're even asking you the question, there's a curiosity there. So you have an opening and you have an opportunity. And I think one of the things that's important is to remind folks that we were all once in the dark. All of us that work on this issue, like there's a reason why I know this issue well. It's because I do this for a living. And I was lucky enough to have my eyes opened. When I went to law school, I'm a moderately intelligent person. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but like I'm not the dumbest in the world. I'm pretty average. But I'm in law school. I'm 23 years old. I just have I graduated the top of my class in undergrad. It wasn't until law school when someone talked to me about factory farming that I had any idea that factory farming exists. And so I think that there is something to be said for when someone has the curiosity enough to ask you is, one, explain to them that you're in the dark for a reason and it's not your fault. I mean, it's what corporations do is they market and they do things to prevent you from knowing about the atrocities that are happening. So it really isn't your fault. And that this is an opportunity to educate yourself. And so for me, it's really about not trying to get into a debate with someone and trying to get into a fight. It's trying to open their eyes a little bit, just like I had my eyes opened. And I do find that most people are receptive. I do fundamentally believe that the polling numbers that we have found, when we do ballot measures and we do legislation and we do this work, we do a lot of polling to find out where people stand. And time after time, it's always like 91 to 92% of people believe that farm animals should be well cared for. And I do believe that that's true. In people's hearts of hearts, I do think that the vast majority of people are opposed to the very thing that we're talking about. We just have to give them the opportunity to, one, do something about it, learn about it in a way that doesn't cause them to be defensive, and also realize that this is something that we collectively have to do together. And there's more of us together fighting against it than there are people trying to protect it. And so we have our task and we have our job cut out for us as animal advocates, is to do the best job we can to continue recruiting people in this war against factory farming.
So for someone who's listening who feels overwhelmed by the scale of this problem, where do you recommend they start?
I mean, there's so many answers to that. I mean, for a lot of people, I say start with the most easiest things that you can do. And one of them is to just look at your own buying behavior. Like I said, when you go into the grocery store, every single time you buy groceries or every time you go to a restaurant and you decide to do something, you're voting with your dollars. I mean, just as much as you go into a voter box and you vote for a president or your local officials, every time you step into a place of business and you hand your hard-earned money over to a company, you are actively telling a company, I support the thing that you're providing. And if that comes from a low welfare or a incredibly bad system, you're essentially telling this company that I'm willing to pay for this badness. Now, granted, the vast majority of people don't know this. And so one of the things that I say is kind of take a little inventory. What are the values that you hold true to your life? What are the things that you care about as a person? And for me, I don't want to cause harm. I mean, it really is as simple as that for me. Is like, I just don't want to cause harm, whether it's to humans, to the environment, and to animals. I don't work on farm animals because I particularly have an affinity towards farm animals. I work on farm animal issues because it's the largest amount of suffering. I mean, I love dogs and cats, and I love people. I love the environment. For me, it's about how I can make the biggest impact. And for people that are listening to this, or your friends and family that are asking question, is the biggest impact you can have is when you sit down to eat 3 times, 4 times, and unfortunately in the United States, 5, 6 times a day, or when you go into a restaurant, you're voting with your dollars. You're voting with your dollars. And you have a chance to vote for the things that represent the future that you want to see. We all have that power. And I can't tell you the number of companies that I work with that tell me, well, we would love to move over to a higher welfare this or a higher welfare that, or offer more plant-based options. But customer demand says that people want eggs from caged hens. I don't believe that to be true. I don't think that they know that it's coming from caged hens. And oftentimes, unfortunately, people just don't know how much impact the dollars that they spend can have on a company deciding to go in a different direction. So that's the number one thing that I would recommend to people is take inventory of the things that matter in your life and the values that you want to project into the world, and then make sure that your individual behaviors that you do day in and day out represent those values.
Before we have to say goodbye, Matthew, tell us how we can find you, how we can support you. Maybe there's some campaigns you would like us to talk about so we could shine a light on that.
Of course, yeah. So you can go to CIWF.org. It's Compassion World Farming, so CIWF.org. There's a ton of information on our website about how folks can get involved in the things that we're working on. But most importantly, I think this is something we just need to talk about. This is something in this particular moment in time. This is a heavy time for everyone. No matter what issue you care about, this is a tough time. But collectively, we are stronger than the badness that is in this world. And I do fundamentally believe that this is kind of the darkness before the dawn, and we are going to get to a better place. But it's going to require those of us that want to fight to continue fighting. We have to fight through this, and we will. Well, there are better days ahead. And I do fundamentally believe this to be true. And I've said this, and I'll continue saying this, unfortunately, to the day that I die, is that this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Factory farming will come to an end. The abuse of animals on the scale that's currently being done will come to an end. It's just, how much work are you willing to do to make it come just a little bit sooner? And that's what our mission is, and that's what our job is just to make it come a little bit sooner.
Thank you, Matthew. This has been a conversation with Matthew Dominguez of Compassion in World Farming. And I'm Cheryl Moss. And if you have liked today's conversation, please subscribe so that we can create a better life for animals.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Life for Animals podcast. Together, we can create a world where all beings are treated with dignity, respect, and care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people and spread awareness about the incredible work happening in animal sanctuaries. You can also share this episode with friends and fellow advocates to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep speaking up, taking action, and making a difference for the animals.